Welcome. Glad to have you all here at our Theological Institute here at Holy Family Catholic Church in Austin, Texas. Tonight we are excited because we've seen Mother Annie joining us since November for our masses here at Holy Family, and she brought another guy tagging along with her this evening, her husband, Dr. Jimmy Watson. So glad to have you all here with us at Holy Family Catholic Church. Maybe first of all, I just want to acknowledge Dr. Watson, how much we are grateful to you, because we know from the stories that Mother Annie has told us that Mother Annie would probably not be here if it weren't for you.
True.
Either because of the way in which she first came into contact with independent Catholicism through an ordination at your church, but also your bringing her to Weimar, Texas, brings her closer here to us. So we are so excited to have you here with us this evening.
Right. I can tell that story, how we got her in.
Well, tell it. Let's begin with that story then. I was going to have since we hear Mother Annie's voice, I was going to have her sort of kick off with some introductory words, but then we'd love to hear all of these stories as well of the two of you and your stories of ministry together.
Yeah.
Should we have a few introductory words, Mother Annie? Any
Sure.
thoughts as we kick off?
I'll let Jimmy tell the story of how I became a part of the independent Catholic movement / women's priest movement. It was back in 2012, and I'll let him tell the story because he's pretty proud of it. I want to say that I discerned a lot before I ever decided to go back and become a part of the women's priest movement. I had at one time been a former nun and left that life and was always very active in my church, teaching formation, confirmation, heading the youth. And my faith was always very important to me, but it was lacking that one thing, and that was that I knew I wanted to do more than what I had previously done as a nun. And through my husband, I was able to become a women priest, and it's been a wonderful journey. I actually started out with a former priest here. For a while, I was with Father Daniel Storrs in Bloomington, Indiana, and I was with Maria McLean, an RCWP priest, and Deborah Myers, an RCWP bishop, at a small community up in Indianapolis. And after that, I had the experience of being at St. Stanislaus for 7 years in St. Louis through my mentor and great friend, Father Mark Bozick. And now I'm here with Father Jamie, and I'm looking forward to spending some years here at Holy Family, and I'm just so excited to be a part of this beautiful faith-filled community.
Awesome. Welcome, Mother Annie. So glad to have you with us. For those who may not have their acronym dictionaries on them, the RCWP is the Roman Catholic Women Priests. So it's a group of priests like Mother Annie who see themselves solidly within the Roman Catholic Church and its tradition of retrieving that ancient practice of ordaining women. We recall that women were part of the ordained ministries of the church until the 6th century. That's more than a quarter of our history as a church, before the boys' club, before the boys definitively excluded the women. So we've heard your story, Mother Annie, as part of our gathering in Las Vegas, what we call our 21st Century Phoebe experiences. But for those who didn't hear those stories, and the credit that you gave to your husband for introducing you to independent Catholicism, maybe this is our chance to now switch to Dr. Watson and tell us the story. 2012, how did y'all come about knowing independent Catholicism?
So, yeah, a little bit of a fluke, but I was a UCC, United Church of Christ pastor serving in Louisville, Kentucky. And we'd been married a couple of years, maybe? No, just barely. We'd just barely been married. Not maybe months, right? And we were living in Louisville, and one day I had a phone call from a colleague of mine in the Louisville area, and to ask whether my church would be willing to host an ordination for a woman Catholic priest. And my response was, I've never heard of that. Tell me more. And so he did, and then he brought in a couple of ladies to talk to me. And the key here is that we were hosting the ordination, right? We were not doing it. We were just providing the facility because a Roman Catholic church was not going to do this. And what it was, there was a woman in the Louisville area. She was a former professor, and she was pursuing ordination with the Association of Roman Catholic Women Priests, which is the ARCWP, sort of an offshoot of the RCWP. I thought that was interesting. I took it to my church council, and they said, "Yeah, I mean, we're open to that. We'll host it. They can use our building." So I go home, and we hadn't been married very long, and we're trying to make this work, a Protestant Catholic, little marital union here, trying to understand each other. And I walk in and say, "Hey, Annie, guess what we're going to do at St. Andrew's United Church of Christ in Louisville, Kentucky?" She said, "What?" "We are going to host the ordination for a woman Catholic priest." And she looked right at me and said, "Women can't be priests." Just like that. And I said, "Exactly, which is why we are hosting it, a Protestant church." So, and I said, "And these ladies," I told them a little bit about you and your background and how involved you are in your faith. "They would like to meet you." She said, hesitantly said, "Okay." So we set up a time soon after that to meet, and I'll just use this sort of language. They sucked her in. They grabbed a hold of her and like, "Oh yeah." So she began to go through that process. But it's kind of interesting that me, just a Protestant guy out there floating around, would be able to bring that to her life, even though she's a cradle Catholic, right, for her whole life. So it's been quite a journey. And then we were there for a while. We did a short little stint in Indianapolis where she got some more training under Maria McLean that she mentioned, Nancy Myers. And that's where she met Father Daniel, and did a lot of good ministry in just a couple of years we were in Indianapolis. And then I am called to St. Louis, to a church in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm sure many of you have heard about Ferguson, which I can talk about that later. And when we're coming there, one or both of us were friends with Father Mark Bozick on Facebook. I can't remember. And he knew that we were moving there. He knew about Annie. So he invited us to his office. We both went soon after we moved there. And they talked, and they decided to give that a shot. And Annie ended up being there for 6.5 years, I think, doing ministry there at St. Stanislaus Polish Catholic Church in St. Louis, which has a very interesting history, and how they became independent. So, and that's part of your story too, right? That linkage there. But that's what we've been doing. And then and in our tradition, we have a free call system. So I heard about this little church in Weimar, Texas, and I sent them my profile, and the very next day I got a phone call, and it was soon after that we moved down here. So we've been there almost a year, and things are great. So
Awesome.
Anyway, that's
Welcome
where
to
we
Texas.
are now.
Welcome
Yeah.
to Texas.
Well, and this is my home state.
Really? Where are you from?
I'm from San Angelo, Texas.
San Angelo, Texas.
Are you really?
San Angelo too.
Yeah. Fifth generation San Angelo, and right here.
So let's back up and talk vocation stories.
Sure.
Because when many of us met Mother Annie, it was in Las Vegas when we stayed and had a slumber party between Holy Family, and Mother Annie joined the Holy Family slumber party. But there she shared part of her vocation story and her being in religious life previously, etc. So let's give a chance to Mother Annie to tell her vocation story, and then hear Dr. Watson's vocation story. And while you're thinking of your own vocation stories, I just want to acknowledge that it took me years to learn how to pronounce this word that you used, because here in Texas we call it Louisville, but I understand in Kentucky they call it Louisville.
Mhm.
It's like one syllable.
Right,
Louisville.
right.
So
Close to one syllable as you can get, right? Yeah.
glad to have you here.
Sure.
Mother Annie, so for those who haven't heard your vocation story, tell us all about your call to, you're growing up within the
Yes,
Roman Catholic tradition, you're called to ministry.
Very much so. I have an Italian mother. So we very, very strict Catholic home. We have lots of members in our family in holy orders, and it's something that I had wanted to do, and my parents supported it. I have aunts that are still nuns. a few uncles that are retired from being priest, but it was something that I knew from a very early age that that's what I was going to pursue. Once I was in there, once I had joined and had time to reflect and work within my order, I came to be frustrated at a number of things, but felt that I could still do what I was called by God to do, but outside the convent, outside holy orders. And I kind of made a promise to myself that because my faith was so strong, that if I left the holy order, if I left Sisters of Mercy, that I would be very diligent in pursuing a life of ministry somehow. And I did that through teaching, through being a part of my local parish, through being a Eucharistic minister, through helping another woman head the youth program. And it was very important that I brought my children up the same way that I was brought up. And my son, Andrew, who was here just a couple of years ago, finally when he was a freshman in college at University of Kentucky, he finally said to me, "Do I need to be an altar server anymore? I've been doing this since I was in third grade." So I gave him a break. Megan, as we all know, she's autistic. She had many jobs at Saints Peter and Paul in Danville. She used to clean the pews and vacuum and tidy up. So our life was always centered around our faith and our church. And well, fast forward, I got divorced and met by chance this guy. And really, I think that I always feel that when God closes one door, he opens another. And we've learned so much being I guess you'd say, mixed couple. When I first agreed to go on a date with Jimmy and he told me he was a pastor, he said, "Well, I'm a pastor with the United Church of Christ." And I was like, "Okay, Protestant church." Well, when he got up to go to the bathroom, I got on my phone to look up the United Church of Christ. Had no idea about that denomination. I just, when you grow up Catholic, there's Catholics and there's Protestants and then, Buddhists, whatever. But we just go on Jewish, and so we kept dating, and he told me a story, and it's true. He kind of lured me in because I was kind of set on never getting remarried again. But he did lure me in, and we've got such a great story, and we work together well in ministry. I look at things a lot different through being married to him. And as he said, in 2012, he introduced me to Bishop Bridget Mary Meehan, who's my bishop. And I was lured into this women's priest movement and went through all kinds of training and was ordained. And my ordination anniversary is May 15th, so it's coming up, 2015 in Tampa, Florida. So another year of ministry, but I'm very excited that I'm part of this women's priest movement. We're a movement within the Roman Catholic Church, we like to say. We're a movement to say, hey, women can be called to priests. Stop marginalizing us and start recognizing that women can be priests. So it's important for me, and it's important for my movement to be a part of the independent Catholic movement as well, to be a part of Jamie's church. We're very excited that I have gotten this opportunity to serve as a visiting priest and to put ourselves out there. So.
Awesome. What a beautiful thing for us at Holy Family to be able to have the two of you representing how it is that Catholics and non-Catholics, we can get together, we can come together, we can love one another and live in peace with one another. and be happily married. In the Catholic Church, remember a few weeks ago we had a lesson on the sacrament of marriage and how it was that going all the way back to Tertullian, how it was that he was saying, if you marry, you must marry within our faith tradition, our religion. Just last night I was reading a book called a book by Father Godfrey Schlachter, who is the president of St. Joseph's College in Collegeville, Indiana. Long story, but he wrote a book called Forbidden Fruit or Mixed Marriage, helping people to sort of like reconceive this, that it's not this grave sin or evil to be loving another person regardless of who that person is. So, Jimmy, tonight at our Quinceañera Mass, we heard about the call of Jeremiah. We heard a bit about Mother Annie's vocation story. Now we're on the edges of our seat waiting to hear about your vocation story, how it was that you felt called to ministry and what that's looked like over the years. You've been in ministry now some 33 years?
Yeah, my ordination, 30th ordination anniversary is May the 1st, coming up.
Of what year would that have been then, 33 years ago?
1993.
1990.
Yeah. So I was a licensed pastor for a few years, and then became ordained finally on May the 1st, 1993.
Tell us the story of your vocation. How were you called?
Yeah, so I grew up, San Angelo, but outside of San Angelo, on the other side is a little town called Sterling City. You're familiar with that?
Sterling City.
Yeah, it's a one-horse town. They might have two horses. I'm not sure. I don't know where they are now. But so that's where I grew up. My family's from San Angelo, but I grew up Southern Baptist. And my vocation story begins in a Bible study on a Wednesday night at a little Baptist church in Sterling City, Texas. In January, the professors at the Baptist universities and seminaries will go out, or they used to, and they would do what they call a January Bible study. It'd be 1 week in a local congregation somewhere. They all just pick a place and they go. We had a guy named Dr. Shields who came to our little church from Hardin-Simmons University, which is in Abilene, Texas. And start out Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night. By Wednesday night, I'd attended every session. I'm a young guy. I'm 25, just turned 25. And I was a college dropout, by the way, had been for a while. And it's Wednesday night, and we get into on the book of Romans somewhere, and really great discussion. Afterwards, Dr. Shields told the pastor, said, get that guy, bring him over to the parsonage. I want to talk to him. So they got me. I went next door after the Bible study, sat down, and Dr. Shields, long story short, influenced me, lured me to go to enroll back in school in his university at Hardin-Simmons. It's only 90 miles away, so that next August I did. And I really thought, because my parents had a little grocery business, little mom and pop store, that's what I would do the rest of my life. That's where I was working at the time. That I would go and I would finish my bachelor's degree in religion and move back home and be a glorified Sunday school teacher. You know, a Sunday school teacher with a bachelor's of arts in religion. Look at this. I'm a really good Sunday school teacher. While I was there, I did so well that the school had a fairly new master's program in religion. And they said, hey, if you stay here for that, we will pay for it. I thought, I can't turn down a free master's degree, right? So I did that. And then I thought, well, then I'll go home and I'll be a really glorified Sunday school teacher with a master's degree. And then I was convinced by the vice president of Hardin-Simmons to apply for PhD work. Now, my parents, neither one graduated from high school. I had no idea what a PhD was or is. I said, tell me about that. I don't know, but he helped me go through the process, and I got into Baylor University. By the time I got to Baylor University to go into PhD work, I knew two things. One is I wanted to preach. I wanted to be a pastor by then. And number two, I wanted to be a United Church of Christ pastor, not Southern Baptist, because the Southern Baptists are going through what I call the Holy Wars. And I didn't want to be a part of that. And I'd read about the UCC as a very progressive denomination, and that fit who I was, right? So I went that direction. And long story short, I started out, I got in their system, received a call to 2 churches north of Waco, and I've been doing that ever since. Have done a little teaching along the way in Texas prisons, teaching college courses in Texas prisons, state, local, state, and federal. I've done all 3. Not doing it right now, but I did that years ago. So I just kept going, and here I am.
Awesome.
Don't regret any of it. Now, the store that my parents own, you know, as the years went by, my parents are getting very anxious that who are they going to leave the store to? My sister didn't want it. My brother didn't want it. I don't know if God did this. I don't, my theology doesn't go this far, but in February of 2003, the store accidentally burned to the ground.
Yikes.
My parents took the insurance money and said, we're not doing this again. So it left me a little bit of a nomad. After that, I felt like, well, I don't really have any place to go now. I better keep doing this, right? So
Awesome. Appreciate your sharing your story.
yes.
We're going to pause and see what questions or comments we have in this room as a result of this. And then after the questions and comments, we're going to hear some stories. First, of ministry in Louisville. We have some various connections in Louisville, so we want to hear some stories from Louisville. We're going to hear some stories from Indiana, since we have connections to Indiana. And then we're going to hear stories of Ferguson, because we heard this in the news. But for those of us here in Texas, Ferguson sounds like thousands of miles
No
away.
idea where.
So before we come back to those stories, let's see what questions and comments we have. Deacon Stephen and then Mario.
My question is for Brother Annie. So, you grew up Roman Catholic women's priest, but you're not part of the Roman Catholic Church. So,
No.
how's that?
So the movement's been going on for 20 years. It just celebrated its 20 years. And it started as calling themselves the Roman RCWP, Roman Catholic Women Priests. And the reason being is we say that we're a movement within the Roman Catholic Church. We're a movement to get the Roman Catholic Church to change. So that's why we use the word Roman. Of course, you know, the Roman Catholic Church does not recognize us. We're all excommunicated. But our basis for this movement is to hopefully bring about change, probably not in my lifetime, but maybe, you know, I don't know how long it'll take, but to get the good old boys club to recognize that women can be called just as men can be called. So that's why we use the word Roman within our name, our movement. And we have the Roman Catholic Women's Priest Movement and the Association of Roman Catholic. We're under the same umbrella. It's just that the people in the association, the ARCWP, tend to be more social activists, doing more social justice work. They don't mind getting arrested. We have a very famous Janice Shevardushinska, and she likes to get arrested probably monthly. So they kind of sprung off from the RCWP, even though we are under the same umbrella. And that's the social justice more rebels, I would say. I am not looking to be arrested, but Bridget Mary's always been my presiding bishop, so I kind of stuck with her.
What I like to say that the purpose of the Roman Catholic women priests is to poke the Vatican in the eye.
There's something beautiful. I mean, think about that for a moment. For them to say, no, we are as Roman Catholic as anyone else. We self-identify as part of this church, and women were part of this church tradition for so many years. I mean, there's just something very, very
I
special,
think
very
it's
prophetic.
historical.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
I think what they're doing is very historical.
Before we move on to the next question by Mario, though, we have to ask, when you say getting arrested, we're not talking about like being arrested for like drunken driving or something. Like, what are some of the things that they're arrested for?
Well, Janice Shevardushinska, up until about 3 or 4 years ago, would go to the Conference of Bishops every year. The National Conference of Bishops,
There you
their
go.
gathering, and she would go into the church and she would lay herself on the altar and not move.
They would drag her out.
Yeah,
She's
they
an
would-
anti-war protester
Yes,
too.
or several of
Anti-nukes.
them would show up and sit on the steps of whatever church they were meeting at, refusing to get up. so those types of incidences.
Yeah.
No drunken driving. No,
But making a statement on an issue.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
Taking a
it.
step.
We have big, huge posters, primacy of conscience, ordained women, and wherever there's a call, or if any of us are feeling the need or the urge to go, we're supported, though we will have to cover our own legal expenses.
Mario?
I'm just so elated that you are here with us, Mother Amy.
Thank you.
And I posted on on Facebook where you're giving the mass, and my sisters were like, "How come she's doing a mass?" I said, "She is a priest."
Yeah.
And Joseph, my friend, told me, "We treat people like they are persons. They're not. There's no
There
difference.
you go.
They're just persons in this country." So I'm just so happy that you have been tremendous for us.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
and my mother was the one that would send us to church, and she would read the Bible every night, and then I would ask her, "How come our priest doesn't let us have Bible study?" And she would say, "Well, it's my job to teach you about the Bible." And I would say, "Yes, but it would be nice for a discussion, to have discussions as, in Bible studies." And I'm so happy that Father Jamie has organized this Bible study. I have learned so much from him.
Praise the Lord.
And I'm just so happy that you're here, and Father Jamie.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Talking about retrieving an
And
ancient
it's an Angelo
tradition,
guy.
right? When we look at the scriptures, St. Paul had this vision in his letter to the Galatians of what Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, whom we celebrated the week before last, she talked about it as a discipleship of equals, right? In a culture of patriarchy or clericalism, there are certain persons who are seen as being above other persons. No, what we have going on here is something that might be described as a discipleship of equals. Galatians 3:28. There is no male or female, slave or free, Jew or Greek. All of us are one in Christ. Other,
Yeah, I call it the democratization of religion.
the democratization of religion.
Yeah.
Say more.
Yeah. Well, it's just that it kind of indicates that we are equal, have freedom to speak and believe as we will, and all that. And I see that happening in the church, like with the printing press, kind of put the hands of the Bible in the people. That was democratizing. The internet does the same thing, I think. People have access to information that they used to not have access to.
Yeah.
And again, it's sort of level the playing field kind of thing. And you're participating in that now. And I think that's God's vision for what we're to do and be. Yeah.
It's a very Roman Catholic. So the Second Vatican Council, remember the Second Vatican Council, we went from being this pyramid sort of church. The pyramid was toppled down. And when you're in the ocean, when all of us are floating in the ocean, who's above the other? We're all at the same level. Other questions and comments? We're ready to hear about Louisville. Joe, loud voice.
Just somebody mentioned Baylor University.
Huh?
Baylor University was funded by a woman. You don't know that. Totally paid for by a woman.
Back in the
Praise the
day.
I
Lord.
ought to give her credit.
There you go. There
I
you
think
go.
it's the
Credit where
first
credit is due.
Baptist school. Yeah.
So stories of Louisville. Did I pronounce that right?
Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah.
Louisville. Many of us remember back in 2018 already, Father Lawman Chibundi came and visited us from Louisville, where we have a large independent Catholic community, Rabuni Catholic community. I was very familiar with Louisville, and that's where I learned to pronounce it many, many years ago. I was a conventual Franciscan friar, and our provincial house was right outside of Louisville at Mount St. Francis, Indiana, right across the border from Louisville. So spent a lot of time in Louisville. Spent a summer of 1994 when The Lion King was coming out. I was in Louisville, Kentucky, preaching for the missions that summer. So any stories of ministry from Louisville, Kentucky?
Father Rabuni,
Mhm.
he was there for a while. He
He came to your church.
he came to my church and
He nested
and
for a small. Was he?
he tried to do a nesting church there. Yeah. He attempted.
Meaning,
So little startup congregations, need a place to go, and so they call it nesting.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so he was there.
he
for a
did
little
that
while
in our
with
church
Jim's
when I was
church.
there. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. I think they moved. I think they found their own place.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think they have their
I
own.
believe so.
And
So
don't they
were-
have 2 locations now, I
That's right.
think, in Lebanon, Kentucky, which is close to where I'm from, Danville, and then in Louisville.
Any stories of ministry in Louisville, Kentucky? Louisville, Kentucky?
You hosted the first, it was
ONA.
actually you hosted the first woman, in our movement, the very first ordination in
in Louisville.
Louisville
that area.
was at St. Andrew, and then your church
Well,
became ONA.
Yeah, so in my denomination, we have a designation called Open and Affirming, and short for ONA is what they call it. Open and Affirming is that the United Church of Christ public welcome to the LGBTQ plus community. It's an official welcome, and churches in our denomination are free to go through a study process where they look at the issue, they discuss it, and then they vote on whether the congregation should become or will become ONA. And up until I got there, I got to Louisville, Kentucky in 2007, and there were no ONA churches in the Louisville area in our denomination, what they call the Kentuckiana Association, is what they call it. It was all the churches in our area. And so I took that church through that process. We voted to become ONA, and within the next few months, 3 other churches in Louisville decided to join ranks and become ONA. And that year we went to what they call General Synod, which is our national meeting, and there was an ONA breakfast. So for people that are in churches that are officially ONA, so we went in this breakfast, and when a few of us walked in that door, we were all from Louisville. We walked in and they stood up and applauded, and they said, "You guys you're the epicenter of the ONA movement right now." So, but it was a big deal at the time to do that, and that's really part of, even today, that's a big part of their story at St. Andrew United Church of Christ. So, I would say that was sort of the main accomplishment for us when I was there in that church for about 6 or 7 years. Yeah.
Awesome. Any stories? So you mentioned Kentuckiana. What about stories from Indiana? Many of us know Father Daniel Storrs, who I understand went by another name when he was in Indiana.
Kostakis? maybe?
Kostakis? So
Yes.
in Bloomington, Indiana, then is when he was with us from the fall of 2018 through 2019. Then he started a community here right before the pandemic. Not a good time to start a congregation. But any stories from ministry in Indiana?
Yeah, tell them about that. How did you meet him there?
I think he reached out to me.
Yeah.
I think I was at that point,
You were new.
I was fairly new. I had just become a deacon, and I was serving an RCWP Bishop, Deborah Myers. She had a community with Reverend Maria McLean, and he reached out to them and asked if I would be interested in coming down. He had a small community called the Bloomington Inclusive Community, and it was right on the campus of Indiana University.
Yeah. It was like 45 minutes away.
And it was nested in a UCC church, Faith
One of ours. Yeah.
UCC church, and asked if I would like to come and visit. And he had another priest, part of the maybe American Catholic, ACC, another independent movement. His name is Ryan Cox, Father Ryan Cox. And I visited a few times, and he asked if I would help out in ministry, and I said, surely. And I was with him for about 18 months, maybe. Were we there about 18 months?
Almost 2 years.
2 years, yeah. So I served with Daniel from the time I was ordained as a deacon until we left Indianapolis 18 months later, heading down to St. Louis. A really beautiful community, a lot of young people from the university, a lot of LGBTQ folks looking to find a place where they could feel comfortable to worship. There was also a Mennonite community that met at the same time. Occasionally we'd come together and share a meal, and they would come into the chapel and just kind of view what we were doing. It was a good learning experience. I still once in a while reach out to Father Daniel. So I applaud him and thank him for giving me some a little initial training, though the women are pretty, they have a rigorous program that you pretty much have to follow, but it was a good experience.
And mind you, this was in a United Church of Christ facility, which had an independent Catholic church and a Mennonite church meeting together. So there's a theme here, because even in Indianapolis, Maria McLean's community met in the conference building, which was where the offices for the United Church of Christ over Indiana, Kentucky were housed. So they shared that space. And again, and Annie was, brought into it, and we hosted that ordination earlier. So there's a big connection between our congregations and the women's movement and independence around the country. We see it in St. Louis too. It happened there as well. So
Here within our movement, just so that we know, Lutherans, the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and the UCC, the United Church of Christ, have been our greatest allies outside of independent Catholicism. So
that's
we're
true.
grateful.
Yeah, the Lutherans are very big into that too. Yeah.
We'll just pause and see if we have any questions about ministry in Kentucky and or Indiana and or in Kentuckiana. After that, we'd like to hear more about Ferguson, because we know that Ferguson was the hotbed of some social justice activity only a few years ago. Let's just pause and see, do we have any comments? Deacon Stephen, jump on in.
You said it officially way back. What's the difference in a licensed pastor and an ordained pastor?
So in the Southern Baptist tradition, you're first licensed, and that's very little vetting. It's basically just sort of a platform. Say, here's your license, now go preach. Learn how to do it. And then, and also in the Southern Baptist, you're ordained through your local congregation. Now, so I was never ordained with them, but when I got in the United Church of Christ, ordination is on an association level. So you're vetted through a sort of an area. And I was ordained by the North Texas Association of the South Central Conference of the United Church of Christ. And basically, the northern part of Texas is what that means in our denomination. But we have a committee that's an association level committee, and they vet us in all the ways that happens. So and then ordination takes place. But I was a license with the UCC is you have to have a little more. It's sort of up to the association to say, okay, you have enough to get started to work toward your ordination. And they knew I was in school, so they gave me the license, and I was able to continue going to school. I never went to seminary, by the way. It's a hole in my resume. My journey has all been through the universities, which is fine, but I tell people I never had preaching 101. So, if you listen to me preach, you go, I don't know about that. That's
Yikes.
That's what happened. I didn't go to seminary. No, I'm fine.
Awesome. Other questions or comments? We ready to shift to Ferguson, Missouri then? So you'll have to refresh our memory about what were the events that took place in Missouri and Ferguson. Roughly when was that? Were you all living there at the time?
No,
and tell us about ministry in that context.
Came in a year after.
So 2015, so it happened in 2014.
August of 2014 was when Michael Brown was an 18-year-old African-American boy that was shot in his near his apartment, his complex, or within the complex, and by a police officer. And it became, it really sort of ignited the Black Lives Matter movement, although that began with the Trayvon Martin killing in Florida a few years earlier. But that really ignited the BLM movement. So I'm sure you remember that story. Well, during the interview process for me to take this congregation in Ferguson, which, by the way, Ferguson is in North County, St. Louis County. So when we say St. Louis and Ferguson, we're talking about the same thing, because St. Louis County encompasses Ferguson. During the interview process on the phone with the people at my church, what would be my church, Emmanuel United Church of Christ, there was some things going on. I think there was a hearing going on about whether the police officer was culpable for what happened and so forth, and so there were some riots that were going on and protests and things like that. So it was kind of dangerous even at that time. But after we moved there were a few protests that went on. There were protests almost every day, because that wasn't the only shooting that took place or that takes place in that area. And so there's always something going on. There were sites around St. Louis County where you just know every Saturday you're going to go there and, there's a protest going on about something. So there's a big activist community in St. Louis, but a lot of it began with the Mike Brown shooting. So my church in Ferguson was a 130-year-old German background church, 99% white, in a neighborhood that was by that time 67% black. And so the demographics had been changing, right, for decades. In this little church, and one reason I wanted to go there is because I thought, maybe I can help, because they were desperate to figure out a way to be part of that community. But it's really hard when you're an all-white church in predominantly black neighborhood, and black people have their churches. People would often say to me when I was there, "So how do we get the blacks to come to our church?" And I go, they're sitting around in their churches on Sunday morning asking the very same question: how do we get those white people to come to our church? So it was that kind of dynamic. But while we were there, we made some strides. We were instrumental in starting a mediation program between the police force and the local community. You'll have to help me out. Remind me. We brought in an urban ministry called Up, Unleashing Potential. It was an after-school program for the local children and also a summer program. And Annie and I, we had a once or twice a week appointment at a local elementary school through Unleashing Potential, which was a UCC ministry, by the way. And we would go in there and do artwork or things like that with them. But during the summer, we hosted a summer-long camp. So the top floor of our education building was occupied at first for a couple of years, just during the summer. When I left there, it was occupied year-round with Up people and their programs. And of course, the summer is just full of little children running around right above my office. So I had to get used to in the summer hearing all these footsteps running, and all this noise. So you kind of learn to drown it out. But we did that. We put up a
food pantry box.
A food pantry box.
Did
couple other things.
Amen Corner, a little resale shop. Blessing bags and.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, but we did several things that helped us. Oh, yeah, I remember now. We joined an organization called North County Churches United for Racial Harmony. So it was all about churches in North County, St. Louis, that were interested in working together. And so we would worship together and things like that, and do mission projects together. So there were 4 or 5 things that we did while we were there to help this little old white German church plug into the community. The cherry on the top. When I left, our numbers have been declining for decades, right? Because people are just moving out, and when I left, I told them, I said, your only hope for survival is to transition. And the way to begin that transition is to call a person of color to the pulpit. And they did. the first time in 130 years they called somebody other than an old white dude, right? And he was a retired military guy. He came in doing a bang up job and no one left. I was worried. I thought, well, how many of these people are going to leave, right? I don't think any of them left. And I think they're
He'll
doing
be
well.
ordained.
Yeah, he's still working on his
Yeah,
ordination.
he'll be ordained this year.
Right.
And then he'll be their settled pastor.
Yeah, he'll be their he is their settled pastor
Oh, yeah.
for all intents and purposes, yeah.
So we have to ask you, 130 years. So we sent some ambassadors to St. Louis in the fall for the 130th anniversary of St. Stanislaus
Right.
Polish Catholic Church. That was Becky and Amanda and Terry Ann and Jordan and Deacon Stephen, who were part of that celebration. I'm interested, for those of us who may not be familiar with St. Stan's, maybe if you can enlighten us to that, your experience of ministry at St. Stan's and what we
Yes.
here at Holy Family can learn from
Okay,
St.
so
Stan's.
St. Stan was 130 years old and
Also,
also last
Same
September. And it has always been a predominantly Polish Catholic church. The way the land was acquired, I think, was pretty cheap 130 years ago because the Polish people had sought the diocese out wanting a church for their own instead of going to the Italian or the Irish Catholic churches. And I think they were pretty much given a plot of land fairly cheap with the stipulation that they had to build this church themselves, and they did. And as you guys have been, it's just
beautiful.
a beautiful church inside. Every time I'd be up on the altar, I could sometimes think of I look at the angels up on the ceiling. I'm just to this day, I'm just so blessed to have spent time there. But these people are in the north part of the city, and that area changed drastically as well. So you have a beautiful, beautiful church, and not such a good area. And they too have declining numbers, and it's hard. They do some great work. My first few years, when they still had a Catholic worker house right down the street, I did some ministry there, and it was just a wonderful time. So I was able to do ministry there. We do a great, or they do a great food pantry for the local people. We brought in Father Mark, brought in some Hispanic families that were having a hard time getting to a church for their sacraments without having to pay a lot of money. We did it for free. I think for 6 years I did all the classes, the children's classes, and we've grown. The Hispanic families are coming. My Spanish is bad, but we got through what we needed to do, and it's still a very good program for them. I started a prayer shawl ministry. I filled in when Father would go to Poland or on vacation. We now have a permanent deacon, Deacon Donna Nashevsky. She became a deacon while I was there. We also have Father Jonathan Batchelor. He became a priest along with Father David Jacoby. I think they'll be celebrating their second year this year. Father had a little small seminary kind of thing where they could take some classes through a STEP program, the McGrath School of Life, part of like it's not really Notre Dame, but it's on the campus. It's kind of
The seminary.
a seminary sort of kind of thing. For lay people, or a lot of churches in the area that they use that program for their deacons. And let's see, what else did we do?
Before we open it up for questions and comments on St. Louis, we're particularly interested in what it is that we here at Holy Family could learn from St. Stan's? Is there anything that St. Stan does that we would benefit from? You know, is there some way that we could enrich our experience here at Holy Family by what you and others have seen at St. Stan's?
Oh, no, I think you guys are doing it all. I really do. I mean, I just a warm and welcoming, inclusive community. My son, who's 35 years old, felt the minute he walked in with Megan, who's autistic, he felt right at home. And so for me, that's a big thing. A lot of times when you go to a new church, you really feel isolated. People were talking to him behind him and in front of him, and he just felt like, wow, this place is just a very welcoming community. For a 35-year-old to say that, single male, I thought, wow, I think you guys have great programs for your young kids. From what I've seen, the quinceañeros you do, it's just it's a wonderful community. So
I would say y'all sound very much alike in terms of your activity. Feel like there's always something going on, and that's the one thing I noticed about St. Stan was there's always something going on. She'd tell me, "Oh, we're having this weekend." I'm like, "Oh, I got to go back this weekend again." It's like, I've got my own church, right? Yeah. But very active. They had the big Polish Heritage Center, and they did a lot of events there. But I think that's key to basically having a lot of good fellowship, which brings people together and establishes better relationships. That's what's going to fuel your congregation to keep going and thrive.
We've sent various ambassadors to St. Louis, so let's just open it up for any questions or comments or insights, especially from those folks who've been to St. Stan's in St. Louis. Anything that you'd like to share based on your brief visit or visits to St. Louis?
Well, I mean, I love the church. I wanted, I saw pictures on Facebook that Father Merrick would post, and I'm like, I want to see this church. And it was breathtaking, like you said. And Father Merrick was just so welcoming. We got there early because we took vestments for everybody to use. And he gave us a private tour, and he was talking about the statues, and it was just so welcoming. And I'm glad that you said that your son felt welcome here, because to me, that's my top priority, is to welcome people when they come in. I'll usually ask them if I don't recognize them, are you new to our church, and how did you find out, and where are you from? And that's what Holy Family did to me when I first came here. So I'm trying to pay it forward, but that's what I felt there at St. Stan's too. And just a beautiful community. The celebration, everybody was welcoming, taking shots, and Deacon Stephen was dancing with the girls, but it was just beautiful. And then we went to the Basilica, the big Basilica, and I was just like, it was just too much, it was gorgeous, but it was like, I would rather go to St. Stan's than the Basilica. So
To follow up how welcoming they are, over the years, they let me preach.
First.
They let me walk in with the cross, the gospel. What else did I do? Eucharistic ministry, read scripture, take up the offering, which you don't let a Protestant take up an offering. I mean, come on. You better watch them like a hawk, right? But it seemed like every time I would go, her Deacon Donna would walk up and say, "Can you do this today?" I'm like, "Did you know I was coming?" But they put me on the schedule for what do you call a liturgist? They did that for years. I was on their schedule. So, I mean, if that doesn't say something, welcoming, I don't know what does. I mean, they're just completely, they had a Pride Fest. They had a booth. I mean, go downtown St. Louis during Pride Festival and see a booth from a Catholic church.
right.
That'll get your attention, right?
Absolutely.
So it's great.
But I think you guys are doing some of the same things, and I love the church. I sat there on Sunday looking around, and it's a beautiful little structure.
She gets excited coming here.
Yeah, I get so excited. And
Still a new toy for her, I think.
No, and I'm so excited to see you guys and how welcoming. And I apologize, I will learn some Spanish. Father Brett gave me a website so I can take some lessons. So I will really work on that. But I appreciate that you have opened your arms to welcome me. And I'm so glad you all have Deacon Elsa and Deacon Stephen and Father Brett and Father Roy. So I feel so blessed and humbled.
And we're blessed as well. I just want to say, Dr. Watson, thank you for sharing Mother Annie with us. Every time that she preaches to us, she is absolutely inspired. Amen. And so we just really appreciate her being with us. But we understand that you're inspired as well. I'm holding in my hand one of your books called "People Are No Damn Good."
I'm sorry.
Like, tell us about this book and/or other books that you've written.
Well, the first book I read right after I wrote that we first got married, I was due for a sabbatical, and she said, "What do you want to do for your sabbatical?" I said, "I want to write something." She goes, "What do you want to write about?" And I'm like, I don't know, maybe Jesus. So I wrote a book about Jesus. It's called Big Jesus. Now, I have to say that, and the subtitle of Big Jesus is A Pastor's Struggle with Christology, which is the doctrine of Christ. And all it was just sort of like a diary almost of my journey through the years as just a human being and a pastor, and what I thought about Jesus, what I learned, what I think I learned or didn't, and try to have fun with it. So as this book, which I'll talk about in a second, I had three goals. It was to be informative, and it was to be humorous. So I put a lot of snarky humor in it, and I have to apologize for that at times. But also try to make it personal. So you can tell it's about my journey. I mean, I'm not saying this is the way you must believe about Jesus or anything like that. Well, so that was fine. That was fun to do. So years later, my PhD is in the field of ethics, but I did not continue on as an academician in the field of ethics, but I sort of kept up with it. But it was always sort of something I was interested in. And so a couple of years ago, I decided that I would put that into a book too. So I have the same formula. So I have a title which is kind of snarky and funny called "People Are No Damn Good." I don't mean that literally necessarily. Might mean about a few people. And then the subtitle is "A Pastor's Struggle with Ethics and Morality." You can read that a couple of ways, right? Like I'm struggling with the topic, or I'm struggling myself with being good, right? And so I talk about that in the book. So I just kind of, describe my journey through my field of study, which is ethics, but also what I learned as a pastor and so forth. I have to tell you where this title came from. The only one bad church that I ever had, it wasn't a bad church, it was a bad spot for me. I won't name the name of it, where it was. But when I went there, I was following up a long-term beloved pastor. He'd been there 25 years. He dropped my name to come in when he retired to the search committee. So I came in, they hired me, they called me. And he and his wife stayed there. They didn't go anywhere else. They were right there, which is kind of a little creepy anyway, because when I'm preaching on Sunday morning, he's looking at his watch doing this, while I'm preaching. But on occasion, I would go over to his house and say, "Hey, Bill, give me the scoop about so-and-so, tell me what do I need to know about this family, just trying to get information about people." And of several occasions, he said, "Jimmy, you know what the problem with the church is?" The first time I said, "No, what?" He said, "It's full of people." And he goes, "And then you know what the problem with people is?" I said, "What?" "They're no damn good." So that's where that came from. And it was said in jest, but that stuck in my head all these years. And so when it came time to write a book about ethics, when I was trying to figure out, what angle do I want to take or what title, that's what came to mind. So it's a fun book, but it also, you learn stuff too. Most people haven't studied ethics per se. I mean, we pick it up in life, right? You learn from our parents, our teachers, our pastors, whatever. But there is a field of study out there, a philosophical field called, ethics. And it's good to be introduced to that and kind of learn some of the categories and some of the questions. I have more questions than I have answers, even today, right? But thank you for letting me share.
Awesome.
This is for
Appreciate
you,
that
by
very
the way.
much. Thank you. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
We'll open it up and see if there are any questions or comments. If you were to tell, for those who may be watching us who don't know what ethics or morality is there a way to sum up in a sentence what it is? What are some of the questions, or what would one study in ethics and or morality?
I'll put it this way. When I was teaching ethics in the prisons and a little bit in a junior college, I would say when you study ethics, you're basically breaking the very first commandment. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, go back to the Garden of Eden. They were told not to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of what? Good and evil. Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's what we're doing in this class, folks. And I mean, a couple of people are like, oh, no, we can't do that. So all ethics really is sort of approaching the notion, broadly speaking, what's right, what's wrong, what's good and evil. How do we know what's right and wrong? How do we know what's good and evil? Those sorts of questions, you expand from there. It kind of sounds easy, but it's not. It really isn't. There's a lot of gray area in the world. So that's what we deal with in the field of ethics.
Before we open up for questions and comments, we just want to, and then we'll have some final words. But before that, we need to ask, since the two of you are pastors, are clergy, living in the same household, how much discussion is there when it comes to like planning homilies or sermons? Is there any talk between the two of you? Do you give one another ideas?
When you hear either one of us preach, you're hearing both of us.
A lot of times, so I've already looked at the readings for May 28th, and I'll drop an outline, I'll come up with an idea, I'll do some bullet points and kind of think of what I want to say. And then, a lot of times Jimmy will go, I kind of like that idea. And of course, he preaches for 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. I was taught, if you can't say it in 5 to 7 minutes, stop talking. Yeah, just stop. So we'll share the same ideas sometimes, and if we like each other's topics or where we might have gone.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, this marriage
with
is
it.
going on 11 years, and we do talk about religion a lot, and churches, and things to do in our ministry. We never tire of it, and we never fight about it.
Yeah.
So I think we're pretty blessed that we found, opposites do attract. I 11 and a half, 12 years ago, when I met this guy who said, oh yeah, I'm a Protestant pastor. And like I said, when he got up and went to the bathroom, I was like,
But tell them what you thought the first time you attended one of my worship services.
So it took me a while because I lived in a small town in Danville, Kentucky. So it was an hour and 40-minute drive. And I said, maybe after 3 or 4 months of dating, yes, I'll come. So I dressed up. I left, I don't know, it was still dark in the morning when I left to drive all the way to Louisville, and found a pew on the right-hand side in the middle. People said hi. They didn't really know who I was. I didn't know if I was supposed to say who I was, so I just was real quiet. And afterwards, he said, well, what did you think of it? And I said, well, you guys are really loose.
Loose. That was our first word, loose.
Really loose. Wow.
Follow an order, but I'm pretty casual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was extremely casual. I didn't expect to kneel. I knew that there was not going to be any kneeling, but I also was just, I was taken back by the music. And though I liked your prayers, the prayers were okay. The preaching was really long. I thought, I'm here. And I didn't receive communion. And I'm like, I'm here for the Eucharist. What's going on here? Well, they only do it once a month.
That's our fail. Yeah, we fail.
Only once a month. But I've learned to appreciate it. I will tell you, in Weimar, only he can read the gospel. This UCC church has a lot of Catholic undertones. Before they do the creed, he only proclaims the gospel. They cover the elements. A lot of his your communion is almost like Eucharistic prayer number 2, very Catholic in a way. So Weimar has a lot of Catholic undertones, I guess.
Yeah,
Undertones.
I always say the Catholic Church is the mother church. I mean, why wouldn't we do some of it the same
Yeah.
way? Yeah.
Before we come to concluding words, first from Dr. Watson and then from Mother Annie, we just want to open it up and see if there are any final questions or comments from any of us here in the room and for anyone who's joining us on
Yeah,
Facebook or
I'm
YouTube. Becky and then
just
Deacon Theo.
curious about what you said, being loose. Exactly what did that mean? I mean, I know the Catholic Church, our church, Catholic Church, is very structured. You know, we pray this and we do this and we do this. So what exactly, I mean,
Well,
do you mean by loose?
Well, in Louisville, he did have an order to follow, a call to worship, profession of faith, sort of thing. What I thought was, to be honest, they had kids on the altar playing
To the side of the altar.
to the side of the altar the whole time church was going on. I could not get that in my, I'm like, what are you people, why are your kids up
What do they
here?
call that?
Well, I'm looking around like, we're parents, get your kids off the altar. So I had a hard time. I just kept looking at those kids and they were loud. And he was, during his sermon, he was raising his voice. I'm thinking, what you should be doing is saying, kids, down off the altar. I'm getting ready to
I don't like it.
so I thought that was just bizarre. And there was a lot of a couple people were like laying back in the pew, and there was like a couple, maybe it was because they were diabetic, but there was like some eating going on 2 pews away. And I just thought to myself, I really had a hard time. I didn't know if I wanted to go back. It was a very different
It was
experience.
loose.
Loose.
Final comments, Stephen and then Joe? Or Joe.
Question, what religious order were you?
The Sisters of Mercy.
The Sisters of Mercy.
The reason
Some of
I
us,
ask is
go
that
ahead.
The bishop, I was in Tennessee,
Oh,
and
okay.
the bishop there controlled the whole state. He would only allow the Sisters of Mercy. That was his rule. And it ended up being a real problem because we had Polish churches, we had German churches, we had the whole list. And he couldn't find any, the right language or something. And some higher authority came in and wiped out all those small churches, said there'll be one church, no Polish, no German. And that almost caused the war, but other than
Awesome. Before we go to Deacon Stephen, we have to ask them, when you became a Sister of Mercy, did they change names at that time when you came in? Or was this was post-Vatican II, you kept your baptismal name?
Mhm.
Okay. Deacon Stephen?
Mine isn't a question. I've just this entire time I've been thinking back to when we were in Las Vegas and how nervous I was to meet Mother Annie because she was the first woman priest that I ever met. So the entire ride on the plane, I was nervous. Like, and I knew we were going to share the house with her. So I was like, oh my God, what is she going to be like? What is she going to be like? And then we got there late. Mother Annie was already asleep. So I was like, oh my God. So she has to be an older lady. So we're sitting there in the morning, and it's me, Jordan, Becky, and Father Roy, and the Captain Terry. And here she comes down. I'm like, oh, she's not what I thought she was gonna be. And we just sat there for a good hour and a half. All of us just talking because we had somewhere to be, but we just talked. And for me, the fact that you're here now with us, it's like full circle. I sometimes have to just thank God because when I met you, I was so emotional because I never met a woman priest. And so the fact that you are here now, I think it's God. It's gotta be God.
Thank you. And I wish I would have gone to breakfast with you and hung out, but I will tell you of the one time I was not prepared. Father Mark said, "Oh, you're only going to talk for about a minute, so don't really prepare anything." And then he got back to me and he goes, "I was wrong." And I'm like, "What do you mean you're wrong?" And he goes, "Well, you're supposed to talk for more than a minute. You're supposed to kind of tell a whole story." I'm really? It's really? And he's like, "Yeah." So I apologize. I would have loved to have gone to breakfast with you, but I went back upstairs and sat there for a long time writing and making sure it was more than a minute. So
Other final questions or comments before we go to concluding words from our guests here this evening? Maybe Dr. Watson will have some final words from you and then from your wife. Final words as we look back on.
I was nervous when I first met her too.
Was she loose
for
too?
different reasons. So. Come out right there. But anyway, thank you for inviting us, and this is really fun. Yeah.
What a delight. Final words, Mother Annie?
No, just that like I said, I'm excited to be a part of your church, Holy Family, and I look forward to a few years at least before he decides to retire, being here with you and being a part of this beautiful, welcoming, inclusive community.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Watson and Mother Annie. What a delight to have you both.